Around the year AD 60 or 61, the Roman province of Britain was set on fire. This wasn't some border skirmish or a minor tribal spat. This was an inferno of pure vengeance that would swallow three of the province's most important towns. It was an uprising led by a woman whose name would echo through history as a symbol of ferocious resistance: Boudica. A massive coalition of British tribes, united by fury, descended on the symbols of Roman power, leaving a trail of fire, ruin, and bodies. It was a campaign of shocking brutality that ended in a desperate final showdown. A battle that pitted the raw, overwhelming force of a people's rage against the cold, calculated discipline of the Roman war machine. This is the story of how a queen, wronged and humiliated, brought a Roman province to its knees and burned its budding commercial center to the ground. It all begins not with armies, but with a will. The king of the Iceni, a tribe in what is now Norfolk, was a man named Suetonius. For years, he'd walked a political tightrope, ruling as a client king, a supposedly independent ally who kept the peace for Rome in exchange for their recognition. He'd grown wealthy and maintained a delicate balance. But that balance depended entirely on him staying alive. Fearing what would happen after he died, Suetonius drew up a will he thought would protect his family and his people. He named the Roman Emperor Nero as co-heir, right alongside his own two daughters. It was a classic political move, an act of deference meant to force the emperor's hand and make him safeguard the kingdom. It was a disastrous miscalculation. To the Romans, a client king's territory was basically a loan, not a gift. When Suetonius died around AD 60, Roman officials simply ignored the will. They didn't see a partner to be respected. They saw an asset to be liquidated. The man in charge of the province's finances, an imperial procurator named Quintus Decianus, moved to annex the Iceni lands completely. His agents descended on the kingdom like vultures. What happened next wasn't just a transfer of power, but a brutal and humiliating subjugation. Roman moneylenders, and the historian Cassius Dio claims this included the emperor's own tutor Seneca, suddenly called in massive loans that had been extended to the British elite. Land and property were confiscated from Iceni nobles, who were treated like conquered subjects, their status erased overnight. At the center of this storm was the royal family. When Boudica, Suetonius's widow, dared to protest this blatant violation of her husband's wishes, the response was one of staggering cruelty. According to the Roman historian Tacitus, whose own father-in-law served in Britain, Boudica was publicly flogged, and her two young daughters were raped. This was more than just a political power play. It was a deep personal violation designed to shatter the Iceni spirit. The flogging of a queen and the rape of her daughters were acts of ultimate degradation, meant to reduce them to the level of slaves. But instead of breaking Boudica, the Romans forged her into an icon of rebellion. The outrage was the spark that lit the fuse. Word of the atrocities spread, and a deep-seated resentment that had been simmering across southeastern Britain began to boil over. Boudica, now the living embodiment of Roman injustice, started rallying the tribes, not just for independence but for revenge. Boudica's call for vengeance found fertile ground. The neighboring Trinovantes tribe, whose ancestral lands had been seized to build a colony for Roman veterans at Camulodunum, modern-day Colchester, were eager for payback. The construction of a massive, expensive temple to the former Emperor Claudius in their old capital, funded by them no less, was a constant, bitter reminder of their subjugation. Other disaffected groups flocked to her banner. An army began to form, a vast coalition of warriors united by a shared hatred of Roman arrogance. Roman historians like Tacitus and Cassius Dio, who are our main sources, claim the rebel army swelled to incredible numbers. Some say 120,000, others as high as 230,000. Modern historians are pretty skeptical of these figures, as they likely serve to magnify the glory of the eventual Roman victory. Still, whatever the true number, it was an immense force, far larger than anything the Romans had ready to stop them. This was an army fueled by pure rage, a blunt instrument of destruction aimed straight at the heart of Roman power in Britain. The storm wasn't gathering anymore, it was about to break. And its first target was the veteran colony that had so offended the Trinovantes, Camulodunum. While Boudica's rebellion took shape, the governor of Britain, Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, was hundreds of miles away. A tough, experienced commander, he was on the island of Mona, Anglesey, in North Wales, leading a campaign to wipe out the Druids, who the Romans saw as a core of spiritual and political resistance. With the governor and a huge chunk of the provincial army occupied, southeastern Britain was dangerously exposed. The rebels hit Camulodunum, the provincial capital at the time, with shocking speed. The town was a symbol of Roman conquest, a colonia, settled by retired legionaries, but it was badly defended. Public buildings had been prioritized over walls. The rebels swept through, slaughtering the inhabitants and setting it ablaze. Archaeologists digging in modern Colchester have found a thick layer of burnt red and black debris from this attack, a so-called Boudican layer of ash and destruction that confirms the ancient accounts. The few survivors took refuge in the last defensible structure, the stone temple of Claudius. It was a temporary reprieve. The imperial procurator, Catus Dacianus, the man whose greed had helped spark the whole mess, managed to send only 200 poorly equipped troops as reinforcements. They were wiped out almost immediately. Boudica's army besieged the temple, and after 2 days it fell. Everyone inside was killed. As news spread, a real Roman military unit, the Legio Nona Hispana, 9th Spanish Legion, raced to relieve the city. They were ambushed on the road by the triumphant Britons. The legion's infantry was annihilated. Only the commander and some of his cavalry managed to escape. The psychological blow was immense. A Roman legion had been shattered. Catus Dacianus, finally realizing the catastrophe he'd unleashed, fled in terror to Gaul. For a moment, it seemed like Roman Britain was on the verge of total collapse. Intoxicated by victory, Boudica's army was now a terrifying, seemingly unstoppable force. From the ruins of Camulodunum, they turned southwest. Their next target was a bustling commercial hub, a 20-year-old settlement that was rapidly becoming the economic heart of the province, Londinium. Suetonius Paulinus, hearing the dire news, reacted with lightning speed. He left a garrison on Mona and rode ahead of his main force, racing down the road now known as Watling Street to reach Londinium before the rebels. He arrived to find a town in absolute panic. Londinium was a thriving center of trade, but it wasn't a military fortress. It had no walls to defend it. Suetonius, a pragmatic and unsentimental general, made a brutal calculation. With his limited forces, he knew he couldn't hold the town. To try would be to sacrifice his men and himself for nothing. He made the agonizing decision to abandon Londinium to its fate in order to save the province. He offered to escort anyone who wished to leave with his column, but many residents couldn't or wouldn't flee. Those who remained were shown no mercy. Boudica's warriors fell upon the town and repeated the massacre of Camulodunum. Roman historians claim the rebels had no interest in taking prisoners for ransom. They were bent on pure slaughter by gibbet, fire, or cross. Cassius Dio's account gives gruesome, possibly sensationalized, details of torture and ritual killings. Archaeology once again backs up the ancient texts. Excavations in the city of London consistently reveal a thick red layer of burnt debris, a stark signature of the city's destruction. But the rampage wasn't over. From the smoking ruins of Londinium, the rebel army marched to their third and final target, Verulamium, modern St. Albans. Verulamium was different. It was a municipium, a town primarily of Britons who had adopted Roman ways and been granted a degree of Roman legal status. It seems their collaboration with the occupiers marked them for death. Tacitus reports the town was destroyed. though the archaeological evidence for widespread burning is less clear and more localized than at the other two sites. Across the three destroyed settlements, Tacitus claims an estimated 70,000 to 80,000 Romans and their allies were killed. The province of Britain was bleeding. While Boudica's army carved a path of destruction, Suetonius Paulinus was regrouping. He had made the cold, hard choice to sacrifice the towns to preserve his army, the only tool that could stop the rebellion. He gathered what forces he could: his own Legio 14th Gemina, parts of the 20th Valeria Victrix, and any available auxiliaries. He commanded a force of about 10,000 men. He was severely outnumbered. To make matters worse, reinforcements he'd ordered from Legio II Augusta near Exeter failed to arrive. Their acting commander, Pius Posthumus, had apparently lost his nerve and refused the order, an act for which he would later fall on his own sword. Suetonius was on his own, facing an enemy that had steamrolled every obstacle. But he was a professional Roman general. He knew battles weren't won by numbers alone. He had discipline, training, and superior equipment. What he needed was the right battlefield, a place where he could cancel out the Britons' numerical advantage. He fell back along Watling Street, letting the rebel army come to him, searching for the perfect killing ground. He found it in a spot that remains a mystery, though many think it's somewhere in the West Midlands. Tacitus describes it vividly: a narrow gorge with a dense forest protecting his rear. The ground in front opened onto a plain where the Briton army would have to assemble in full view with no chance for an ambush. Here, their vast numbers would become a liability. They'd be forced to funnel themselves into a narrow front, unable to surround his smaller force. Suetonius set his trap. Now, all he had to do was wait. The Briton army arrived bursting with confidence. They had destroyed 3 cities and crushed a Roman legion. Victory seemed inevitable. They were so sure of it, in fact, that they had brought their families along to watch, positioning them in a huge crescent of wagons at the back of their army, a gallery from which to witness the final destruction of the Romans. It was a catastrophic error, a barrier that would soon block any chance of retreat. According to Tacitus, Boudica drove her chariot in front of her warriors, her daughters beside her, delivering a fiery speech. She declared she wasn't fighting as a queen for her kingdom, but as an ordinary woman avenging her lost freedom, her beaten body, and the stolen honor of her daughters. The Britons charged. They came on as a massive, screaming wave of humanity, a disorganized horde counting on sheer ferocity to break the Roman line. Suetonius's men stood firm, silent, and disciplined. He ordered them to hold until the last possible second. Then, on his command, the legions unleashed their pila, heavy, metal-tipped javelins designed to punch through shields and shred enemy formations. Thousands of spears slammed into the charging Britons, turning their assault into a tangled wreck. A second volley followed, compounding the chaos. With the Britons' charge broken, Suetonius ordered the advance. The legionaries drew their short, stabbing swords, the gladius, and pushed forward in tight, wedge-shaped formations that carved into the disorganized mob. Now, in the tight confines of the gorge, Roman discipline and armor were decisive. The Britons, packed in, had no room to swing their long swords, and their lack of armor made them fatally vulnerable. What was supposed to be a battle became a slaughter. As the Briton line crumbled, Roman cavalry swept around to attack the flanks, cutting down anyone trying to escape. The Britons broke and ran, only to find their path blocked by their own wagons and families. The Romans fell upon the trapped mass, and the killing became indiscriminate. Tacitus reports that neither women nor children were spared. He gives an almost unbelievable casualty figure: 80,000 Britons killed for the loss of only 400 Romans. While those numbers are almost certainly exaggerated, the result was not. It was a decisive and utterly devastating Roman victory. The Battle of Watling Street shattered the rebellion. The uprising that had burned its way across the province was over. Boudica's fate is uncertain. Tacitus says she took poison to avoid capture. Cassius Dio says she fell ill and died. Either way, the warrior queen who had so terrified Rome was gone. In the immediate aftermath, Suetonius led punitive campaigns, hunting down any remaining resistance with fire and sword. His actions were so harsh that they drew a warning from the new financial procurator, Julius Classicianus, who told Emperor Nero that Suetonius's vengeful policies would only provoke more conflict. Nero, who had briefly considered abandoning Britain altogether, ultimately chose a path of reconciliation. Suetonius was recalled, and a new governor was appointed with instructions to pacify the province through moderation, not just brute force. The Romans had learned a hard lesson. The revolt exposed the deep flaws in their early administration of Britain, a system built on greed and arrogance. In the years that followed, Roman policies shifted towards greater integration and cooperation with local elites, rather than simple suppression. The story of Boudica is a powerful clash of cultures, written in fire and blood, a brutal lesson in how empires are made and resisted. If you want to explore more stories of rebellion and conflict from the ancient world, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next video. Boudica's revolt was a short, violent, and ultimately failed uprising. It didn't drive the Romans out. In fact, its suppression solidified Roman control over the southern half of Britain for generations to come. But its impact was profound. The cities she destroyed, Colchester, London, and St. Albans, were eventually rebuilt, with London rising from the ashes to become the new provincial capital. The physical scars of her rebellion, that distinct layer of burnt material, can still be found by archaeologists, a silent testament to the fury of her campaign. Our knowledge of these events comes almost entirely from Roman writers, who portrayed Boudica as a terrifying barbarian queen, a figure used to explore Roman morality and the dangers of imperial overreach. We have to read their accounts with a critical eye, aware of their bias. We'll likely never know the precise number of warriors, the exact location of the final battle, or what the queen was truly thinking. Yet, Boudica endures. She has been reclaimed by history as a national heroine, a symbol of freedom and defiance against an occupying power. She was the barbarian queen who burned Londinium, a woman who, in response to unimaginable humiliation, unleashed a storm of vengeance that shook Roman Britain to its core and left a permanent scar on its history.